overwhelmed by the fleeting pleasures and pains of existence like a leaf caught in a whirlpool, unable to escape its cycle of rebirth. In contrast, he saw another individual radiant with an inner light like the full moon shining brightly on the night sky. Bhishma continued, his voice weaving a tapestry of wisdom. Some people blinded by ignorance applaud acts as if they were the ultimate truth, but those who possess keen perceptions and have attained to that higher understanding, which is knowledge itself, never seek to accumulate more access. He spoke. Bhishma's words seemed to transport Sukha to a realm beyond the mundane world. He saw beings freed from the influence of all pairs of opposites, pleasure and pain, existence and non-existence, living in harmony with one another, like droplets of water merging into the ocean. Bhishma concluded his explanation by saying the gulf between those devoted to knowledge and those devoted to acts is as vast as the limitless sky. The individual soul free from destruction remains existent forever like the moon on the last day of the dark fortnight, shining in its supple, yet undestroyed form. As Bhishma finished speaking, Sukha felt a sense of awe wash over him. He realized that his understanding had been expanded by the wise words of his venerable teacher, and he knew that their conversation would remain etched in his mind like the markings on a sacred stone. In the sacred groves of ancient India, Sukha, a young seeker of truth, sat at the feet of his venerable teacher Vesa with eyes aglow like embers. Sukha asked for guidance on the path to righteousness. "I have come to understand," he said, "that there are two kinds of creation, one born from the universal soul and another that arises from the power of knowledge. But I seek to know how to live a life in harmony with time itself." Vesa, wise and compassionate, smiled at Sukha's inquiry. The path of righteousness, he began, was first laid down by Brahma himself. The ancient rishis, those great seers of old, followed this path and conquered the worlds through their devotion to Brahmacharya, a life of self-control and spiritual discipline. To illustrate his words, Vesa described the 4 stages of life: the Brahmacharan, who lives with his preceptor; the Grihastha, who tends to his family and domestic duties; the Vanaprastha, who renounces worldly attachments and lives in the forest; and the Sannyasin, who dedicates himself entirely to spiritual pursuits. Each of these stages is a rung on the ladder of enlightenment. Vesa said, by ascending this ladder one reaches the realm of Brahma. Sukha listened intently as Vesa outlined the duties of each stage for the Brahmacharan. He must live with his preceptor, serving him and learning from him. He should be like a menial servant, performing all tasks without expectation of reward or praise. When he is called upon to speak, he should do so simply and humbly. As Sukha listened, his eyes grew wide with wonder. How can both the declarations of the Vedas be authoritative? He asked, for he had heard that they sometimes seemed contradictory. Vesa smiled knowingly. The 4 stages of life are like a ladder attached to Brahma. He said, by ascending each rung in turn one reaches the realm of Brahma. Sukha's mind was filled with questions and doubts, but as he listened to Vesa's words, he began to see the path ahead more clearly. He knew that he must follow this path, not just for himself, but for all those who sought enlightenment. And so Sukha set out on his journey, armed with the teachings of Vesa. He lived with his preceptors, serving him and learning from him. He practiced Brahmacharya, renouncing worldly attachments and cultivating self-control. And as he climbed each rung of the ladder, he felt himself drawing closer to the realm of Brahma. In time, Sukha's training was complete. He had spent a 4th part of his life studying the Vedas and observing vows and fasts. He had given his preceptor the file fee, a token of. In the tranquil surroundings of his ashram, Vesa began to impart the wisdom of the sacred scriptures to his eager students. The householder, he said, should observe meritorious vows and dwell in their homes surrounded by their loved ones. He explained that there were 4 kinds of conduct. A householder could adopt: one who stored enough grain for 3 years, another who kept just enough for 1 year, a third who lived from day to day without worrying about the future, and a 4th who collected grain like a pigeon. Vesa's words were filled with depth and meaning. As he continued, each successive kind of conduct is superior in merit to the previous one according to the scriptures. He described how each type of householder could practice various duties: sacrifice on their own account or for others, teaching, learning, giving, and accepting gifts. The householder who stored grain for 3 years could perform all 6 duties, while those with less storage capacity were limited in their practices. As Vesa spoke, his students listened intently, taking in every word. He emphasized the importance of never cooking food solely for personal use nor slaughtering animals, except in sacrifices. If you must kill an animal or cut down a tree, he said, gently, do so according to the ritual laid down in the Yejuses, for that is due to both animate and inanimate existences. His words were like a gentle stream flowing through the ashram, soothing and calming his students' minds. He cautioned them against sleeping during the day or night, eating twice between morning and evening, and summoning their wives to bed, except in their season in your homes. He said no Brahmana should be left or unworshipped. As the sun began to set, Vesa's students felt the sense of peace settle within them. They knew that they had been given valuable guidance on how to live a life of domesticity. Vesa continued, you must worship guests who present sacrificial offerings, who are cleansed by Vedic lore and observance of excellent vows. He explained that the scriptures ordained that what was offered to the deities and pitras in sacrifices and religious rites was meant for the service of such guests. As night fell, Vesa's students retired to their quarters, their minds filled with the wisdom they had received. They knew that they must give food to brahmacarans and sannyasins, and that a householder who fed all relatives and servants before eating himself was said to eat vyasa. The remains of the food offered in sacrifices constituted amrita, which only those who had fed to others could truly taste. The next morning, Vesa's students gathered again around him. He spoke of the importance of being content with one's own wedded wife, avoiding malice, and subduing their senses. You must never quarrel with your Ritvikur. In a serene forest, Bhishma sat in contemplation, his eyes gazing towards Yudhishthira with a deep sense of wisdom. My son, he began, you have been taught about the duties of domestic life as ordained by the wise. Now I shall tell you about the next stage, one that is considered most excellent, the Vanaprastha Madhyas. Bhishma spoke. His words carried a gentle breeze through the forest, rustling the leaves and awakening the senses of those present. When a householder reaches old age with wrinkles on his body and white hair on his head, he should retire into the forest. Bhishma continued, this is the third part of his life, where he will observe the Vanaprastha Madhyavisa. The revered sage nodded in agreement as Bhishma spoke. He had witnessed many a wise man embark upon this path, and he knew its significance. Vesa's eyes sparkled with wisdom as he added, in this stage one should attend to their fires, just as they did during domestic life. They should be desirous of sacrificing and adore the deities according to the ordained rituals. As Bhishma continued, his words painted a vivid picture of the Vanaprastha Madhya. The householder should live upon rice growing indigenously, wheat growing under similar circumstances, or grain that grows wildly belonging to none. He said they should eat what remains after feeding guests, and present offerings of clarified butter in the 5 well-known sacrifices. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the forest, Bhishma spoke of the 4 kinds of conduct laid down for observance in this mud. Some collected only what was needed for the day, while others stored grain and other necessities sufficient to last for 12 years. Forest recluses may act in these ways, Vesa said, for worshipping guests and performing sacrifices. As night fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. Bhishma's words wove the tapestry of simplicity and austerity as he described the habits of those who lived in the Vanaprastha Madhya. They sat and slept on the bare earth, stood on their toes, and contented themselves with small mats of grass. The next morning Vesa continued his discourse, speaking of the 4th and final stage, renunciation. When one is weakened by decrepitude and afflicted by disease, he said, one should abandon the forced mode of life and enter this last stage. Bhishma nodded in agreement, his eyes shining with a deep understanding. In this final stage, Vesa explained, one should perform a sacrifice that could be completed in a single day. The dakshina, or gift to the priest, should be everything one possessed. He should himself perform his own sraddha. Vesa, in the serene surroundings of a tranquil forest, Sukha posed an intriguing question to Vesa. While living in accordance with the highest principles of life, he asked, how should one who seeks to attain the ultimate truth and knowledge set their soul on the path of Vesa? The revered sage smiled knowingly as he began to share his wisdom. My dear Sukha, first one must cultivate purity of conduct and body through the practice of brahmacharya and domesticity. These 2 modes of life will prepare your mind
and heart. For the next step on this sacred journey as Vesa spoke, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, carrying with it the whispers of ancient wisdom. When you have subdued all faults of the mind and heart, he continued, you should then pass into the most excellent mode of life, sannyasa, or renunciation. This is the path where one renounces worldly attachments and focuses solely on attaining the highest objective knowledge. With each word, Vesa's eyes seemed to sparkle with an inner light, as if the very essence of truth was being revealed. One who practices yoga without companionship, who beholds everything is a repetition of their own self, and who never discards anything, will never fall away from emancipationness. The sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. Vesa's words took on a deeper significance. The mendicant should live without keeping sacrificial fires or fixed habitation. They should beg for food in villages, providing for themselves each day without storing for the morrow. Their heart must be fixed on the Supreme as they take up penances in this serene and peaceful atmosphere. Vesa's words wove a tapestry of wisdom, guiding Sukha towards the ultimate goal. The mendicant should eat little under proper regulations, not more than once a day. They should wear rags, live in solitude, and be indifferent to all creatures. The very essence of their being must be free from attachments. As night began to fall, casting a dark blue hue over the forest, Vesa's words took on an air of mystery. The mendicant who has subdued their ego, who is content with self-knowledge, and who is free from fear and desire, will transcend death itself. In this hushed, reverent silence, Sukha listened intently as Vesa revealed the secrets of the ultimate truth. The gods know him for a Brahmana who is freed from attachments, who lives in solitude, whose heart is tranquil, and whose days are dedicated to righteousness. They know him for one who has given assurances of compassion unto all creatures. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Vesa's words reached their crescendo. The gift of assurances of harmlessness unto all creatures transcends in point of merit all other gifts. He who, in a serene and tranquil setting, Vesa began to impart his profound wisdom to his devoted student. The jiva, or soul, he said, is the core of all existence, possessing the multifaceted attributes that are modifications of Prakriti. As he spoke, the atmosphere was filled with an air of reverence, as if the very essence of truth was being revealed. Vesa continued to explain the intricate relationships between the senses, mind, and soul, like a skilled charioteer navigating through treacherous terrain. He said, the soul navigates the complexities of life with the aid of its senses, which are like well-trained steeds. The objects of the senses were superior to the senses themselves, while the mind stood above those objects. The understanding, that subtle and piercing faculty, was even more elevated, and at the pinnacle of this hierarchy stood the unmanifest Brahma, the supreme reality beyond all comprehension. As Vesa's words wove a tapestry of meaning, his student listened with rapt attention. He spoke of the yogin who, through intense contemplation and self-control, could merge the senses and their objects into the inner soul by reflecting on the three states of consciousness. The object, thought, the act of thinking, and the thinker. The yogin could transcend the limitations of mortal existence. When one's heart is purified, Vesa said, and one lives in harmony with one's true nature, the highest happiness is attained. The student's eyes shone with understanding as he listened to Vesa's words. He realized that this was not just a philosophical discourse, but a path to liberation from the cycles of birth and death. The yogin who had achieved such a state lived like a steady flame, unshakable in its calmness. As Vesa concluded his initial explanation, he emphasized the importance of faith and sincerity in grasping the truth. This knowledge, he said, is not to be imparted to anyone but those who possess tranquil souls, self-restraint, and a deep understanding of the Vedas. The student listened intently as Vesa outlined the qualifications for receiving this sacred wisdom. Finally, with an air of gentle inquiry, Vesa asked his student, tell me, what is it that you still seek to understand? What doubts remain in your mind? As he spoke, the sun and moon seemed to rise above the horizon, illuminating the landscape of knowledge. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, as if the very secrets of existence were about to be revealed. In a tranquil setting, Sukha, a devoted student of the great sage Vesa, sat in awe, seeking further enlightenment on the mysteries of Adhyatma. With reverence and curiosity, he asked Vesa to elaborate on this profound
Subject Vesa, with his wise eyes shining like stars, began to weave a tapestry of wisdom and Atma. He said, is the essence that pervades all living beings, is composed of 5 fundamental entities: earth, water, light, wind, and space. These elements, though one in substance, manifest as distinct specks of creation, like the waves of an oceanus. Vesa spoke. Sukha's mind was captivated by the analogy of a tortoise stretching out its limbs and withdrawing them again. Just so Vesa explained the 5 great entities undergo transformations, creating and destroying all things in the universe. The Creator has distributed these elements unevenly among creatures, each with its own unique proportions to serve diverse purpose. As Sukha's curiosity was piqued, he asked how one could comprehend this intricate web of relationships between the 5 entities and their manifestations in various beings. Vesa smelled, his eyes twinkling with pleasure to grasp the unequal distribution. He said, consider the senses and attributes. They arise from these elements. Sound originates from space, while form is born from light. Taste emerges from water, scent from earth, and touch from wind. The vital breaths, action of limbs, and digestive fire are all transformations of wind. As Vesa continued to unfold the mysteries of Atma, Sukh listened with rapt attention. He asked how one could distinguish between the senses and attributes, and how they relate to the understanding, which is the source of consciousness. Vesa's response was like a gentle breeze on a summer day. The understanding creates the senses and withdraws them into itself. Just as the tortoise retracts its limbs, it is the understanding that transforms into the 5 attributes: form, scent, taste, sound, and touch, and also into the 6 senses, including the mind. When the understanding is absent, where are the attributes? His mind was filled with wonder as he contemplated the intricate dance of elements and their transformations. Vesa continued to explain that in every being there exist 3 fundamental qualities: Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. These qualities arise from their own counterparts and manifest equally in all creatures. Rajas is associated with states of cheerfulness, joy, and tranquility, while Tamas is linked to stupefaction, incomprehensibility, and unascertainable causes. Sattva, on the other hand, is characterized by delight, equanimity, contentment, and a sense of unity. As Vesa concluded his discourse, Sukha felt his understanding expand like a lotus blooming in the sun. He realized that Atma, in the heart of ancient wisdom. Vesa spoke of the intricate dance between the mind, understanding, and soul. He began by explaining that the mind is a vessel for countless ideas born from the depths of our inner selves. The understanding, a supple yet powerful force, settles which ideas are true and which are mere illusions. The heart, with its discerning nature, decides what brings joy and what causes sorrows. Vesa continued to unfold the mysteries of the human experience. He revealed that the senses are merely extensions of the understanding, each one a unique expression of its power. When we hear, touch, see, taste, or smell, it is not the physical world that is interacting with us, but rather our understanding manifesting in various forms to engage with the external world. Vesa described how the understanding exists in 3 states: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. In Sattva, we experience clarity and cheerfulness. In Rajas, we are driven by passion and desires, and in Tamas we succumb to darkness and ignorance. Yet even as our understanding navigates these realms, it remains a sovereign entity, unbound by the limitations of the physical world. The sage's words painted a vivid picture of the mind, a multifaceted instrument that can be both creative and destructive. When our mind desires something, it is said to become mind-conscious, taking on a life of its own. But Vesa cautioned that the senses must be subdued, for they are mere extensions of the understanding, prone to distraction and deceptionness. We delve deeper into the mysteries of the human experience. Vesa revealed that the soul, or Prajna, is the ultimate reality, the source from which all existence flows. The qualities of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are mere attributes incapable of grasping the essence of the soul. Yet the soul observes these qualities with compassion and detachment, calling them into being as needed. In this tapestry of wisdom, Vesa wove a supple distinction between the understanding and the soul. While they are distinct entities, they exist in a state of union, like the fish swimming within the water or the blade nestled within the clump of grass. This union is not one of physical proximity, but of essence, a deep and abiding connection that transcends the boundaries of space and time. As we ponder Vesa's words, we begin to see the world in a new light. The universe, with all its complexities and contradictions, is revealed as a manifestation of the understanding, ever changing, yet eternal, and within this vast expanse, we find our own souls shining like stars in the darkness, waiting to be discovered by those who have tamed their minds and surrendered to the wisdom of the ages. In a serene, forest-glade Vesa sat beneath a towering tree, his eyes closed as he began to speak the world around us. He said, is not separate from our own understanding. It is we who create the objects that surround us. Like a spider spinning threads from its own substance, our thoughts and perceptions shape the reality we experience. Vesa spoke his words wove a tapestry of insight into the nature of existence. He explained that the three primary qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, are constantly in flux, transforming one another to create the objects we see, yet it is our understanding, or kshtrajna, that presides over them all, untouched by their ephemeral nature. Some philosophers argued that these qualities persist even after they have been dispelled by knowledge or yoga. They pointed to the subtle signs of their return as evidence of their continued existence. Others claim that when freed from our grasp, these qualities are destroyed forever, never to be seen again. Vesa encouraged his listeners to ponder these opposing views and choose a path that resonated with them. As he spoke, a sense of calm settled over those who listened. They began to see the world in a new light, as a reflection of their own understanding. Vesa's words guided them toward self-awareness, urging them to comprehend their own souls, which are beyond beginning, and he counseled them to move through life with equanimity, untroubled by joy or sorrow, envy or attachment. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the forest, Vesa's listeners felt a sense of liberation wash over them. They realized that true freedom lies not in external achievements, but in understanding their own nature. Like a person walking on solid ground, they would navigate life's challenges with ease and confidence. Of those who grasped this knowledge, the Brahmanas, born into it by virtue of their lineage, were said to possess a special gift. Their comprehension of the soul and its essential nature led them toward high felicity, a state of being that was both sufficient for liberation and a hallmark of true learning. They became wise men and women, crowned with success and free from fear. As the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Vesa's listeners felt their hearts fill with joy and understanding. They saw the world in all its beauty and impermanence, knowing that true happiness lies not in fleeting pleasures, but in recognizing one's own essential nature. And so they walked on, guided by the wisdom of the ages, free from fear and sorrow, and crowned with the knowledge of their own souls. The sun had barely risen over the tranquil landscape as Sukh approached his wise and venerable mentor Vesa with a curious mind and an eagerness to learn. Sukha asked Vesa about the most important duty in life, one that surpassed all others. Vesa's eyes sparkled with delight as he began to narrate the ancient wisdom of the rishis. The senses, he said, are like unruly children, prone to fall into evil habits. They must be restrained by the understanding, like a wise father guiding his inexperienced offspring. As Vesa spoke, his words wove a tapestry of spiritual insight. He explained that the highest penance is not external rituals or sacrifices, but rather the withdrawal of the mind and senses from worldly objects and their concentration on worthy ones. This was the first step in attaining the ultimate goal, to behold the eternal and supreme soul within oneself. Vesa continued, those who possess wisdom succeed in beholding that supreme and universal soul, which shines like a blazing fire in effulgence. He used the analogy of a large tree with its numerous branches and flowers to illustrate how our individual souls are modified by birth and attributes, yet unaware of their true nature. Only through the light of knowledge can one behold this inner self. As Sukh listened intently, Vesa painted a vivid picture of the river of life with its five senses as crocodiles, the mind and purposes as shores, and cupidity and stupefaction as grass and straw floating on its surface. Lust and wrath were the fierce reptiles that lived within it, while truth formed the sacred Tirtha by its mirror banks. Falsehood was the turbulent surge, anger the treacherous mirror. Vesa cautioned Sukh that this river was difficult to cross, but with the aid of understanding one could succeed in freeing oneself from every attachment and acquiring a tranquil heart. By transcending worldly desires and attaining a purified soul, one would become Brahma's self, beholding the origin and destruction of all created objects. As the sun reached its zenith, Vesa concluded his discourse, emphasizing that this knowledge was meant for those with restrained senses, honest behavior,
and a submissive nature. It was a mystery, the greatest of all mysteries, and the highest knowledge one could attain. The person who attained it would never undergo rebirth. Sukha listened with rapt attention, his mind absorbing the wisdom imparted by Vesa. He realized that this ancient knowledge was not just a philosophical concept, but a path to liberation, a way to transcend the cycle of birth and death. As he departed from his mentor's presence, Sukha felt a sense of awe and reverence for the timeless teachings of the rishis.
The revered Vesa spoke with profound wisdom. A true Brahmana must not be swayed by worldly desires. He should renounce all attachments to sensual pleasures and material possessions. The pursuit of honor, achievements, and fame only leads to bondage, for it is a path that perpetuates the cycle of birth and death. A scholar who has mastered the Vedas, yet remains bound by desires, is not considered a true Brahmana. One who has studied all the scriptures, observed the vow of Brahmacharya, and knows the rituals and hymns still lacks the essence of spiritual understanding. True wisdom lies in treating all creatures with compassion and kindness, as if they were one's own kin. The key to liberation is not merely performing rituals or offering sacrifices, but rather cultivating a state of mind that is free from attachment and desire. When an individual ceases to fear others and others cease to fear him, when he desires nothing and cherishes no aversion, then he attains the status of Brahma. Desire is the sole bondage in this world, and it is through renouncing all worldly attachments that one achieves true freedom. Like the moon emerging from murky clouds, the wise individual, freed from the stains of desire, lives in patient expectation of his time. The pursuit of earthly objects only leads to transitory happiness, which ultimately results in falling away from even heaven itself. True bliss lies in cultivating a state of inner peace and contentment, which is indicated by a serene understanding that scorching grief and doubts together with thirst. A person possessing the 6 attributes: contentment, grieflessness, freedom from attachment, peacefulness, cheerfulness, and freedom from envy, becomes full or complete. Those who transcend all consciousness of body and know the soul within attain to emancipation through the aid of the 6 entays, the Vedas: truth, charity, penance, renunciation, and happiness. The wise individual, by understanding the soul which resides within the body, attains beatitude that knows no termination. The gratification he obtains by restraining his mind from wandering in all directions and fixing it wholly on the soul is Ankaroldi, who lives engaged in yoga meditation, suspending his senses that have been duly restrained from unworthy indulgence, is said to be a Brahmana. Such a person is distinguished above others, deriving his joys from the soul. His happiness is continuously enhanced like the lunar disk in the lighted fortnight, and felicity dispels the sorrows of the Jivjan who transcends both the gross and subtle elements. Decrepitude and death cannot assail that Brahmana who has gone beyond the sphere of acts, who has transcended the destruction of the gunas themselves, and who is no longer attached to worldly objects. The Yujin, freed from everything, lives in a state transcending both attachment and aversion, and thus transcends even in this life his senses and all their objects.
In a quiet corner of ancient India, Vesa, a revered sage and storyteller, sat with his disciple, eager to share the secrets of the universe. The disciple had transcended the petty concerns of life, seeking a deeper understanding of emancipation. Vesa began by recounting the teachings of the Adhyatma, a profound exploration of the nature of reality space. He said, is the unoccupied interval that surrounds us. All it is the essence of our ears, which can hear the whispers of the windescience of entities, teaches us that space has sound as its attribute, a vibration that echoes through every corner of existence. As Vesa spoke, his eyes sparkled with an inner light, illuminating the intricate web of relationships between the elements. He continued, the feet that carry us on our journey have wind for their essence. The vital breaths that sustain us are also made of wind, and it is through touch that we experience the world around us, the warmth of the sun, the glow of a candle flame. All these are attributes of light, which has form in diverse colors. As he spoke, Vesa's hands gestured like a conductor leading an orchestra, weaving together the threads of creation. The body, he said, is composed of earth, solid and unyielding. Our bones, teeth, and nails are all made of this stable foundation. But it is not just physical matter. Our sense of taste is also rooted in water, which quenches our thirst and nourishes our being. As he spoke, the air seemed to vibrate with the rhythms of life, a symphony of elements that harmonized in perfect balance. Visa's words wove a tapestry of understanding, revealing the interconnectedness of all things. Each subsequent element possesses the attributes of the preceding one. He explained a nested series of relationships that underlies every aspect of existence. The disciple listened with rapt attention, drinking in the wisdom like a parched traveler at an oasis. As Vesa continued to speak, the room seemed to expand, becoming a vast expanse of consciousness. He described the three supplementary entities, avidya, ignorance, kama, desire, and karma, action, which shape our experiences and perceptions, and then, like a master painter adding final touches to a masterpiece, he revealed the higher realities, the mind with its essence of doubt, the understanding which discriminates and causes certainty, and the soul infinite and all-encompassing. This is the jiva. Vesa said, his voice barely above a whisper, the individual self invested with body and bound by consequences derived from acts. But for those who see the entire assemblage of living creatures as unstained, though endued with all these entities having time for their essence, they have never to recur to acts affected by error. As Vesa finished speaking, the room,
in the presence of his esteemed disciples, the revered sage Vesa began to reveal the profound mysteries of the soul. He spoke of those who had transcended the boundaries of mortal understanding and were conversant with the sacred scriptures. These wise ones, he said, could behold the soul clothed in a subtle body, which was exceedingly fine and detached from its gross physical forms. Vesa continued to speak. His words painted vivid images in the minds of his listeners. He likened the rays of the sun, which course through every part of the firmament, yet remain invisible to the naked eye, to the existent beings that roam the universe freed from their gross bodies. Just as one can infer the presence of these solar rays by reason alone, so too can one sense the existence of these liberated souls. The sage then explained how a yujin with senses subdued and heart filled with knowledge could behold the soul in its counter-image within the gross body. This was akin to seeing the radiant disk of the sun reflected in the still waters below. The yujin's perception was not limited by the constraints of time or space. Whether asleep or awake, day or night, they could behold the invisible beings that dwelled within. Vesa went on to describe the state of a yujin who had achieved mastery over their own soul, freed from the limitations of the physical body and the influences of their mind and understanding. This individual's lingna form was under complete control. Their jiva, or life force, roamed all regions of bliss, unencumbered by decay and death. The sage also spoke of those who had not yet transcended the influence of their mind, and understanding these individuals, he said, could still discern their own body from that of another, even in their dreams, experiencing both pleasure and pain. Their minds clouded by the qualities of rajas and tamas, they were unable to behold the soul within its subtle form. In contrast, those who had dedicated themselves to the science of yoga for the purpose of gaining knowledge of the Supreme Soul could behold the imperceptible linga body and the karana body that remained even in the face of universal destruction. The sage mentioned that this understanding was laid down by Sandalya in the Chandogya Upanishad, sacred text revered by all. Finally, Vesa revealed to his disciples the path to achieving this profound understanding. One must first comprehend the seven subtle entities, the senses, objects of the mind, understanding, Mahavan, manifest or prakriti, and Purusha. Next, one must grasp the supreme cause of the universe with its six attributes: omniscience, contentment, unlimited comprehension, independence, eternal wakefulness, and omnipotence. Ultimately, Vesa concluded that those who had followed this path could behold the high Brahma, guided by the sacred scriptures, their souls now freed from the limitations of the physical world.
In the heart of every human being there is a wondrous tree called desire. Its roots are firmly planted in error, and its trunk is strengthened by wrath and pride. This tree is nourished by ignorance, fed with the waters of heedlessness, and shaded by envy. The branches of grief stretch far and wide, while fear sprouts from every corner. The leaves of this tree are ever changing as men's desires shift like the wind. Thirst for worldly objects entwines itself around the trunk, forming a snare that binds excessively greedy men in chains of iron. They sit at the foot of the tree, worshipping it with the expectation of reaping its fruit, but one who dares to subdue these chains and cut down the tree can escape both sorrow and joy. This brave soul must first recognize the true nature of the tree, that it is born from error and sustained by ignorance and heedlessness. The tree's very existence is a poison, destroying its own root with every indulgence in worldly desires. A wise person armed with the sword of Samai can forcibly uproot this treacherous tree. By cutting through the far-reaching root of ignorance, they can transcend sorrow and find liberation. But for those who fail to recognize the truth, the consequences are dire. They become entangled in the very objects that promise pleasure in every being. There is a city called the body, with its wise ruler, the understanding. The mind serves as the chief minister, guiding the senses in their tasks. However, when the mind becomes tainted by worldly desires, it loses its balance and stability. The understanding, too, descends to a state of equality with the mind, becoming vulnerable to the whims of rages. That dark force seizes control of the understanding, overwhelming the soul that lies within. It is as if an image on a mirror becomes distorted by the presence of darkness. The mind, once a faithful servant, now betrays its master and allies itself with rages together. They enslave the understanding, the senses, and even the soul. Thus, we see how the tree of desire, born from error and nourished by ignorance, can destroy even the wisest of beings. Only through recognition of this treacherous force and its roots in ignorance can one hope to escape its grasp and find true liberation.
In the midst of a serene forest, Bhishma sat with his grandson, Yudhishthira. Sharing ancient wisdom, the venerable sage's eyes sparkled as he began to recount the teachings of the island-born Rishi, whose words had ignited the flames of knowledge in Bhishma's own heart. Listen carefully, my son, Bhishma said, his voice filled with reverence. The Rishi spoke of the 5 elementary entities: earth, water, fire, wind, and space, and their 50 properties that give them life. Bhishma paused, allowing Yudhishthira to absorb the weight of these words. As he began to enumerate the properties of each entity, his voice grew more animated. Earth is immobile, yet it holds within it the power to produce and sustain all living things. Its scent is supple, but its capacity to absorb scents from all around is unmatched. Bhishma's hands gestured as if conjuring the very essence of earth. Water, he said, was cool and refreshing, yet also possessed a fiery passion that could melt even the hardest substances. Its liquidity is a marvel, Bhishma exclaimed, and its ability to be congealed or melted at will is a testament to its adaptability. Fire, the embodiment of energy and life, blazed with an irresistible fury, consuming all in its path. Yet it was also a gentle softener, capable of warming the coldest of hearts. The wind, that great enigma, danced with a touch that was neither hot nor cold, yet possessed a strength and celerity that could shatter even the sturdiest of structures. It is the breath of life, Bhishma declared, and the very essence of movement. Space, the boundless expanse, was home to sound and silence, extension and contraction. Its properties were as mysterious as they were wondrous. As Bhishma concluded his recitation, Yudhishthira's eyes widened with wonder. How can these entities be said to have 5 properties each? He asked, his brow furrowed in curiosity. Bhishma smiled knowingly. The understanding, my son, is a realm beyond the physical world. It encompasses all that we see and experience, yet it also transcends them. The understanding possesses 60 properties, the 50 attributes of the elements, plus those of the mind and the soul. Yudhishthira's eyes sparkled with a newfound understanding as Bhishma continued to explain. The Vedas declare that these entities were created by the Supreme Brahma, who is beyond all deterioration. They are not eternal, but rather manifestations of his infinite powers. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the forest. Bhishma's words settled in Yudhishthira's heart like a gentle rain. The young prince listened intently as the sun had set on the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the lifeless forms that lay scattered across the ground. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, stood amidst the sea of death, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. These lords of earth, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, who once ruled with strength and might, now lie still and silent. Each one was again among men, their prowess in battle unmatched by anyone else on earth. As Yudhishthira spoke, Bhishma, the venerable grandsire, listened intently, his eyes clouded with memories of days long past in the Crete age. He began, his voice low and soothing. There was a king named Anukampeka.
He had been weakened by battle, his armies dwindled to nothing, and his kingdom reduced to ashes. Vishwa's words painted a vivid picture in Yudhishthira's mind. The once mighty king, now brought low by fate of Ishma, continued, and Ukapeka's son Hera was a warrior like no other, strong as Narayana himself. He fought valiantly, but ultimately fell to his enemies in battle. Yudhishthira felt a pang of sorrow at the thought of this young prince cut down in the prime of life. The king in Ukapeka had been consumed by grief, unable to bear the loss of his son. He wandered the earth, lost and alone, until he chanced upon the wise sage Narada. The monarch poured out his heart to Narada, recounting the tale of Hera's death and his own downfall. Narada listened attentively, his eyes filled with compassion. "I shall tell you a story," he said, "one that will help you understand the nature of life and death." And so he began to speak of the creation of the universe, of Brahma, the self-born Lord who had brought forth an endless multitude of living beings. As Narada spoke, Yudhishthira's mind was transported to a time beyond memory. He saw the universe teeming with life, the three worlds overflowing with creatures. But then disaster struck. Brahma's wrath boiled over, and from his body emerged a fire that consumed everything in its path, heaven and earth, the firmament, and all living beings. Nothing was spared, yet even in the midst of destruction there was compassion. Then the divine and auspicious one came to Brahma's side, seeking to soothe his anger. "You deserve boons at my hands," Brahma said, his energy still raging. "What is your heart's desire? I shall grant it to you thus in the midst of death and destruction." Yudhishthira found a glimmer. In a celestial realm, Stan stood before the Lord of all created beings, Mahadeva, with a plea on behalf of the universe's inhabitants. "Know, O Lord," Stan said, his voice filled with compassion, "that my solicitations are for the sake of these created beings. They have been born from your energy, and I beseech you not to be angry with them." He gazed at Mahadeva with pleading eyes, his words echoing through the cosmos. Mahadeva's response was calm and measured. "I am not angry, nor do I wish for their destruction." He said, "The goddess Earth, burdened by the weight of creatures, has solicited me to destroy them as she seems to sink under their numbers into the water." His words were laced with a hint of sorrow, and Sten's heart went out to him. Sten stepped forward, his voice filled with urgency. "Do not give way to wrath, O Lord of deities," he implored. "Be gratified. Let these living creatures be spared, all tanks, all grass and herbs, all immobile beings, and all mobile creatures. They are being consumed by your fire. The whole universe is about to be denuded of life." He paused, his eyes locked on Mahadeva's, as if willing him to understand. The Lord of the deities looked at Stanu with a deep gaze, and for a moment it seemed that the fate of the universe hung in the balance. Then with a gentle nod he spoke. "I will not destroy them," he said, "but how can I neutralize this energy within me?" And so Stanu's words had reached Mahadeva's heart, and compassion began to stir as the divine Brahman Mahadeva suppressed his fiery energy. A great change took place in the universe. The fire that had been consuming all living things was extinguished, and in its place a new order emerged. Birth and death became intertwined as if by an unseen thread. From Mahadeva's body a lady arose, dressed in black and red robes, her eyes like darkest night, her palms and ears adorned with celestial ornaments. She stood before the self-born, and he spoke to her in a voice that echoed through eternity. "O death, slay these creatures of the universe," he said. "I have called you filled with anger and resolved to bring about their destruction." But as she listened to Mahadeva's words, the goddess, Death, felt a pang of sorrow. She reflected on the lives of all beings, foolish or learned, and her heart went out to them without allowing her tears to fall. She held them in her joined palms and spoke to Mahadeva. "I will slay them," she said, "but I implore you, Lord, have mercy." In the vast expanse of the cosmos, a profound conversation unfolded between the grandsire Brahman and his daughter Death. The scene was set in a realm beyond mortal comprehension, where the fabric of existence was woven by the divine hands. Death, with eyes as large as the night sky, stood before her father, her grief momentarily suppressed by an effort of will. She joined her hands in reverence, much like a tender creeper bends towards its support, and spoke in a voice that trembled with compassion. "O revered father," she said, "how can I, a being born from you, accomplish such a terrible feat? The thought of slaying living creatures, innocent infants, youths, and aged ones, fills me with dread. I fear doing something iniquitous." Brahman's response was like a gentle breeze on a summer day, soothing yet firm. "You have been intended for the destruction of all creatures. Death
He said, "Go forth and fulfill your duty. Do not reflect on the propriety or otherwise of this act. It must be done, for it is ordained death." Stood before her father, her eyes upturned towards him. But she seemed to be deprived of life itself. Brahman's words hung in the air like a challenge. Yet death remained silent, frozen by fear, and now the grandsire, his will unbroken, became silent himself, as if awaiting the outcome of his command. His gaze fell upon the universe, and with a gentle smile he cast his eyes on the vast expanse of creation. It was said that when Brahman's wrath subsided, death departed from his side. She wandered to the sacred spot known as the Nuka, where she practiced the most severe austerities for 5 and 10 billion years, standing upon one foot like an unyielding pillar. Yet, despite her efforts, she could not bring herself to fulfill Brahman's behest. She performed penances of another 20 billion years, standing on one foot once more, and lived in the woods with the deer for a period of 10,000 billion years. Death then observed the vow of silence for 8,000 years, floating like a lotus flower on the surface of the water. Next she proceeded to the river Kosakai, where she dwelled upon air and water alone. Her journey continued as she went to the Ganges, then to the mountains of Meru, standing motionless like a piece of wood. Finally death reached the summit of Himavat, where the gods had performed their great sacrifice. She stood there for another 100 billion years, supporting her weight upon the toes of her feet in an act of devotion that aimed to please Brahman. As she stood before him once more, Brahman asked, "What are you engaged in, O daughter?" Death replied, "I am unable to cut off living creatures, father. I seek your forgiveness." And
in the midst of a vast and uncertain world, Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, sought guidance from his revered grandsire, Bhishma. The young prince's heart was filled with questions about the nature of righteousness, what it truly meant, where it came from, and how one could attain. Bhishma, wise and venerable, listened intently to Yudhishthira's queries. He began by explaining that the practices of the good, the sacred Smritis, and the revered Vedas were the three primary sources of righteousness. These ancient texts outlined the principles of right conduct, guiding individuals towards a path of virtue. However, Bhishma continued, there was more to righteousness than mere adherence to these scriptures. The learned sages of old had also identified the purpose behind an action as a crucial aspect of righteousness. By understanding the intention and motivation behind one's deeds, one could determine whether they aligned with the principles of right conduct. As Bhishma spoke, he wove a tapestry of examples illustrating how even the most flawed individuals could stumble upon righteous acts by chance. A thief, for instance, might steal from others, but then use that ill-gotten gain to perform acts of apparent virtue. Similarly, during times of anarchy, individuals might resort to robbery and deception. Yet when their own rights are infringed upon, they suddenly become ardent advocates for justice. Bhishma's words dripped with wisdom as he emphasized the importance of truthfulness. To speak the truth is meritorious. He declared there is nothing higher than truth. Even the most sinful and ferocious individuals could find common ground by swearing to uphold the truth, unifying in their pursuit of wrongdoings. As Yudhishthira listened intently, Bhishma cautioned him against succumbing to the allure of wealth and power. The strong and the wealthy often regarded the principles of righteousness as weak and feeble, but when their own fortunes turned adverse, they realized the importance of adhering to these ideals. Bhishma's words were laced with a deep understanding of human nature, revealing how individuals often fail to see their own flaws, but readily pointed out those in others. He exhorted Yudhishthira to cultivate a pure heart and a cheerful disposition, unfettered by fear or anxiety. By doing so, one could walk the path of righteousness, guided by the principles of truthfulness, selflessness, and compassion. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the landscape. Bhishma concluded his discourse. The indications of righteousness had been revealed to Yudhishthira. Now it was up to him to walk this noble path, guided by wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right.
The sun was setting over the kingdom, casting a warm orange glow over the assembly gathered around Yudhishthira. The prince's eyes were fixed intently on his mentor Bhishma as he posed a question that had been weighing heavily on his mind. This asked that righteousness or duty depends upon delicate considerations. Yudhishthira began his voice, filled with curiosity, that it is fraught with restraints from numerous acts, and that its indications are also contained in the Vedas. He paused, his brow furrowed in thought. But I have a certain inward light, a spark within me, that allows me to discriminate between right and wrong by inference. Bhishma listened attentively, his expression unreadable, as he nodded for Yudhishthira to continue. The prince's words poured out like a river, each sentence building upon the last. I have asked you many questions today, but one remains unanswered. How can duty respecting seasons of distress be ascertained by reading the scriptures alone? Bhishma leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Yudhishthira's. The acts of the good, thou hast said, constitute righteousness, he replied, his voice measured and deliberate. But how are we to define what constitutes goodness? Does it not lead to a circular argument where we rely on the actions of those deemed good to justify our own actions? Yudhishthira's eyes sparkled with understanding as he grasped the complexity of Bhishma's words. He nodded, thoughtfully, his mind racing with the implications. It seems to me that duties have been laid down for each age according to the powers of human beings in those ages, he said. Finally, Bhishma smiled, a small enigmatic smile that spoke volumes about the depth of his wisdom. When all the declarations in the Vedas do not apply equally to all the ages, then the saying that the declarations of the Vedas are true is only a popular form of speech indulged in for popular satisfaction. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the assembly in a soft twilight glow, Yudhishthira's words flowed like a river, each sentence building upon the last. He spoke of the contradictions between the Srutis and Smritis, of how some wicked persons could cause righteous acts to be stopped forever. His voice grew more urgent as he described the delicate balance between right and wrong. The course of duty is finer than the edge of a razor and grosser than even a mounting, he declared, his eyes blazing with conviction. Righteousness at first appears in the form of romantic edifices seen in the distant sky, but when examined by the learned it disappears and becomes invisible as the night deepens. Yudhishthira's words painted a vivid picture of the complexities of righteousness. He spoke of how some ordinary, in the midst of a forest where the trees swayed gently in the breeze, lived Jejali, a Brahmana who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of righteousness. He was a man of great austerity, with matted locks on his head, and his body smeared with filth and clay. For many years he sat by the sea, practicing the most severe penances, observing numerous vows and restraints, and regulating his food according to strict rules. As he sat in silence, lost in meditation, Jejali felt a sense of pride swell within him. In this world of mobile and immobile creatures, he thought to himself, there is none equal to me. Unbeknownst to the Rakshasas who lurked in the shadows, a pair of Pythakas overheard his boasts. They whispered among themselves, there is one named Tiladhara, renowned for his wisdom, and engaged in buying and selling. He too is not worthy of saying such words. The Pythaka's words stung Jejali's pride, and he vowed to meet this Tiladhara. The superhuman beings lifted him from the sea and bid him follow a certain path. With a heavy heart, Jejali set out on his journey, arriving eventually in the city of Varanasi. He wandered through the streets. Jejali spotted Tiladhara, a shopkeeper engaged in buying and selling various goods. The Brahmana approached him with reverence, and Tiladhara greeted him warmly, saluting the guest with proper respect. Tiladhara smiled knowingly, as if aware of Jejali's true intentions. O Brahmana, he said, I know why you have come to me. Listen carefully, for I shall tell you a tale. You have lived by the sea, practicing penances and observing vows, but what about your heart? Have you not let pride creep in? Jejali was taken aback by Tiladhara's words. He recounted his story of living among the birds, how they had built their nests on his head and raised their young ones, and how he had stood motionless for many days, unmoving even when the parents left him. Tiladhara listened attentively, a knowing glint in his eye. You see, O Jejali, he said, your actions were not done out of selflessness, but out of pride. You thought you had achieved ascetic success, and that is why the voice in the sky rebuked you. Jejali's face fell as he realized the truth in Tiladhara's words. He had been blinded by his own ego, and it was only through meeting this wise shopkeeper that he began to understand the true nature of righteousness. Tiladhara smiled again, his eyes filled with compassion. Come, he said, let us walk together. I shall show you. In the presence of Vishnu, a revered sage, Tiladhara, a Vaisya by birth, stood before Jejali, a renowned ascetic. The air was thick with anticipation as Tiladhara began to share his profound understanding of morality. Ahimsa.
he said, is not just a concept, but a way of life. It is the eternal truth that binds all creatures together in universal friendliness and beneficence. With each word, Tulatara's eyes sparkled with conviction as he described his own path. I live simply using materials gathered by others. I purchase goods from traders without cheating and sell them honestly. Tulatara pause, surveying the surroundings, before continuing. A true adherent of Ahimsa is one who treats all creatures with kindness in thought, word, and deed. He never quarrels or seeks to harm another. His heart remains untouched by desire, and he beholds all things equally. As he spoke, his voice took on a soothing quality, like the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Jejela listened intently, his mind absorbing every nuance of Tulatara's words. But how do you attain this state? He asked, his curiosity palpable. Tulatara smiled, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. One must follow in the footsteps of wise and benevolent men who have lived in accordance with the Scriptures. It is not a path for the faint of heart, but for those who have subdued their senses and are guided by knowledges. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the scene. Tulatara's words took on a sense of urgency. The practice of Ahimsa is not just a duty, but a means to attain Brahma. It is the key to transcending fear and attaining fearlessness. He paused, surveying Jejela with an unwavering gaze. I tell you truly, O ascetic, that this path leads to prosperity, heaven, and ultimately emancipation in the stillness of the evening air. Tulatara's words hum like a benediction, inviting all who listen to embark on the journey of Ahimsa. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jejela rose from his seat, his eyes shining with newfound understanding. The encounter between these two seekers had kindled a flame that would burn brightly within them, both guiding them toward the ultimate goal of Ahimsa, the state of being where all creatures are seen as one's own self.
In a bustling marketplace, Jejela, a devout Brahmana, stood face to face with Tulatara, a wise and learned trader. The air was thick with tension as Jejela accused Tulatara of promoting atheism through his teachings on the path to duty, or course of duty closes the door of heaven against all creatures. Jejela declared and puts a stop to their very means of sustenance. From agriculture comes food, and that food offers subsistence even to you. But your doctrines seem to dismiss the importance of sacrifices and the role they play in sustaining life. Tulatara listened attentively, his eyes narrowing as he pondered Jejela's words. He began to speak, his voice measured and calm. I shall now explain the object of sustenance. Tulatara said, I am not an atheist, nor do I blame sacrifices. However, I must say that true understanding of sacrifice is rare. Indeed, the Brahmanas have abandoned their ordained duties, and instead perform sacrifices mean for Kshatriyas. Tulatara's words hung in the air like a challenge. Jejela's eyes widened as he realized the truth behind Tulatara's words. The men of faith, covetous and fond of wealth, Tulatara continue to have introduced many kinds of sacrifices, proclaiming things that are false, but have the show of truth. The consequence is theft, and evil acts spring up. Tulatara paused, his gaze piercing through Jejela's defenses. It should be known that only that sacrificial offering which was acquired by righteous means can gratify the gods, he said. There are abundant indications in the Scriptures that the worship of deities may be accomplished with vows, libations, poured on the fire, recitations, or chanting of the Vedas, and plants and herbs. As Tulatara spoke, Jejela's expression softened. He began to see the truth behind Tulatara's words. The true meaning of sacrifice is not about accumulating wealth or seeking personal gain. Tulatara said, it is about performing duties with a pure heart, without attachment to desires. The Scriptures teach us that from sacrifices spring progeny like clear wire from the firmament. Tulatara's words painted a vivid picture in Jejela's mind. In former days, men righteously devoted to sacrifices used to obtain air from the fruition of all their wishes. Tulatara said, the earth yielded crops without tillage. The blessing uttered by the rishis produced herbs and plants. Jejela's eyes widened as he realized the truth behind Tulatara's words. The men of former times never performed sacrifices from desire of fruits, nor did they regard themselves as called upon to enjoy those fruits. Tulatara said, those who somehow perform sacrifices, doubting their efficacy, take birth in their next lives as dishonest. In a serene and idyllic landscape, Tulatara stood before Jejela, a Brahmana of great wisdom. With a gentle smile, Tulatara invited Jejela to behold the truth with his own eyes. See for yourself. He said, "Who among these birds have adopted this path of duty that I have spoken of?" As they gazed upwards, Jejala's eyes widened in wonder as he saw many birds hovering in the sky, some that were familiar to him, others that were unfamiliar among them. Tilat pointed out a group of birds that had contracted their wings and legs ready to enter their respective nests. "Summon them." Tilat said, his voice filled with affection. Jejala's eyes sparkled as he watched the birds respond to his summons. Displaying their love for him as their father without hesitation, Tilat declared, "You are indeed their father."